Hey everyone, welcome to part 8 of the Pokemon game series in Unity. So in this video, we'll look at how to animate the dialogue like this, and then we'll let the player select an action, and if the player selects fight, we'll show all the moves of the Pokemon along with their PP and type. So if you like the series, please consider subscribing to the channel and leave a like on the video to help the channel grow. So let's start. So first I'll create a script for the dialog box. I'll call this battle dialog box, and in the script first we need a reference to the dialog text, so we need to import unityengine.ui namespace. So we have a reference to our text. So now I'll create a public function that will set a dialog to this text. So let's try calling this function from our battle system. So in the battle system first we need a reference to the battle dialog box script, and in the setup battle function I will call the set dialog function. So for the dialog, I'll say something like a wild Pokemon appeared. So in C Sharp, if you start your string with a dollar sign, then you can add values of different variables inside the string like this. This is called string interpolation. This is a cool feature in C Sharp. So let's assign the battle dialog script to the dialog box, and I'll assign the dialog text. And we need to assign the dialog box script to the battle system. So now if we test the game, you can see that the dialog changed. So now instead of showing the dialog at once, we want to animate each letter one by one. So for that we can use a coroutine. I'll create a coroutine called type dialog. In here, first we'll set the text to a empty string, and then we'll loop through each letter and add them one by one. So after adding each letter, I want to wait for some time. So we can do that by using wait for seconds function. So if I set 1 by 30, it'll wait for 30th of a second after adding each letter. So basically in 1 second, it will show 30 letters. So let's create a variable for this. So we can set it from inspector. I'll call it letters per second. And I'll set 1 by letter per second. So let's set letters per second to something like 30. And in the battle system, instead of calling set dialog, I'll call type dialog. And make sure to put that inside start coroutine since it's a coroutine. Okay, so now if we test the game, you can see that our dialog was animated nicely. So next we'll create the UI to show the moves of a Pokemon. So under the dialog box, I will create a new game object called move selector, and let me just resize this, and I'll just disable the dialog text for now. So under the move selector, we need a text to show the name of the move. So I'll just copy the fight text from the action selector and place it inside the move selector. So let me just place this here, and I'll change its name to move text and change the text to move font. So next I'll use Control D and duplicate 3 more of these text. And in the move selector, I will add a grid layout component. I'll set the cell size as 200 by 50. So if I make this a little big, you can see that all our moves are arranged as a grid. So next I'll add another game object under the dialog box called move details. So this will display the details of the move that is selected. So let me just resize this and I'll just deactivate the action selector for now. So under the move details, I need a text to show the PP of the move. So let me just copy this move text and I'll place this inside the move details. So you can click on the anchor and hold Alt and click on the center anchor. So holding Alt will also set the position along with setting the anchor. So let me just resize that and I'll change the name to PP text. And for the text, I'll just set PP 15 by 20 just to see how this looks. And finally, I'll just duplicate the PP text and create a type text that will show the type of the move. So I'll change the text to type and let me just reposition this. And for both of these, I'll set the alignment to left. Okay, so that looks good to me. So now let's disable the move details and the move selector. And initially we only need the dialog text to be active. Okay, so next we need a reference to all these in our dialog box script. So in the dialog box script, first I'll create a reference for the action selector and then for the move selector, for the move details, and we need a reference to the two text inside the action selector. So I'll use a list for that and I'll call it action text. So next we need reference for all the move text. So we used a list for both of these. This is because we want the player to select different actions and moves, and using a list will make this job easy. So next I need a text for the PP and the move type, and I don't want that to be a list. So let's assign all these to the script. So we have two action text, fight and run, and we have four move text. I'll drag each one of them. And finally, I'll assign PP and type text. So now I'll create public functions to enable and disable these selectors and dialog text. So first I'll create one for the dialog text. And we'll take a boolean which will specify we should enable this or disable this. And every text has a property called enabled, which we can use to enable or disable it. So I'll just assign our boolean to it. So next we'll create one for the action selector. And since action selector is a game object and not a text, it won't have this enable property. Instead, it has a set active function to enable or disable it. Okay, so now let's create one for the move selector. And here I'll also enable the move details, since if the move selector is shown, then the move details also must be shown. So now in our battle system script, we need a variable to store the state of the battle. So I'll create a enum for that. And here I can define all the states I need. So we need a start state, a player action state, a player move state, enemy move state, and finally I'll keep a busy state, which I will use when the player and the enemy are attacking. So let's create a variable for the state. And in the setup battle, after showing this dialog, we'll wait for 1 second and then we will go to the player action state. So to wait for 1 second, first we have to make the setup battle function a coroutine, and I'll call it by using start coroutine. So inside a coroutine, I can just use the yield return statement to execute another coroutine. So what this will do is this will wait for this coroutine to be complete, and only after that the execution will come down. So now I need to wait for 1 second. I'll use the wait for seconds function for that. And after that, we let the player select the action. So I'll call a function called player action. Let's create this function. So in here, first I'll change the state to player action, and then I'll change the dialog to something like choose an action. So since this is a coroutine, I'll have to put this inside start coroutine. And finally, we need to enable our action selector using the public function we created. So I'll pass true since we want it to be enabled. Okay, so now if we test the game, the dialog will be played, and after 1 second, we will go to our player action state. So in this state, we want our player to be able to select one of these actions. So let's do that. So in the battle system script, I'll create a update function, and in the update function, if the current state is equal to player action, then we'll call a function called handle action selection. So let's create that function. So in this function, we will change the selected action based on user's input. So first we need to create a variable called current action. So if you look at our action text list, at the 0th index we have fight text, and at first index we have run text. So if the current action is 0, then fight will be selected, and if it's 1, then run will be selected. So inside handle action selection, if the down arrow key is pressed, then we will increase the value of current action. And we should only do that if the current action is less than 1. Okay, so if we don't have this condition, then the current action will go above 1. And else, if the up arrow key is pressed, we will check if the current action is greater than 0, and then we will reduce the value of current action by 1. So now we need to update the selection in the UI. So in the battle dialog box, I'll create a function called update action selection, and we'll pass the selected action into it. So inside this function, first we'll loop through the action text list, and inside the loop, if the index of the text is equal to the selected action, then we'll just change the color of the text. So let's create a variable called highlighted color, and we'll set that for the text of the selected action. Otherwise, we'll just set the color to black. So we need to call that from here, and I'll pass the current action as the selected action. So now let's choose a color for the highlighted color, and make sure to change the alpha to 255. So now if we test the game, you can see that I can select different actions by pressing the up and down arrow keys. So now in this function, if the Z key is pressed, then we should check the current action. So if the current action is 0, it means fight is selected, and if it's 1, which means run is selected. So if the player selected the fight action, then the player will be asked to select a move. So we need to go to our player move state. So below the player action function, I will create a player move function. First, I'll set the state to player move, and then I'll disable the action selector and also the dialog text, and finally I'll enable the move selector. So let's call that function from here. So if I test the game now, and if I press Z, you can see that the move selection UI has been enabled. So right now the default values are shown for all the moves. So instead of this, we need to set the actual moves that our Pokemon has. So in the dialog box script, I will create a new function called set move names. And this function will take the list of moves of our Pokemon. In here, first we need to loop through all our move text. So we have 4 move text, but the number of moves of our Pokemon might be less than 4, since some Pokemon might just have 2 or 3 moves. So we need to check if I is less than moves.count. In that case, we will set the name of the move to the move text. So the name of the move is inside the base. Otherwise, we'll set this to the move text just to show that the move text is empty. So let's call this function from our battle system. So I'll call this here. So we are passing the moves of our Pokemon to the set move names function. By the way, I made a mistake here. In the first dialog, the name of the enemy Pokemon should be shown. So let's change that. So now if we test the game, you can see that all the moves of our Pokemon is shown here. So since Charmander only has 3 moves at level 7, the fourth move is empty. I'll just change the alignment of all the move text to left, and I'll just reposition the move selector and disable it again. Okay, so this looks much better. So now we should be able to select our moves just like we selected the actions. So inside the update function, if the state is player move, then we'll call handle move selection function. So let's create that function. So we need a variable to store the current move, and just like we did for handling selection, we need to update the current move based on the user's input. So let me just copy paste the code. So here if the right arrow is pressed, we will increase the current move, and we will decrease it if the left arrow is pressed. So in case of the actions, we knew that there are only 2 actions, and the max index of the action is actually 1. But in case of move, the number of moves is not constant. The Pokemon can have any number of moves between 1 and 4. So we need to check if the current move is less than the number of moves minus 1. So now when the user presses the up and down arrow keys, we should move the selection up and down. So if down arrow key is pressed, we'll increment the current move by 2, and if the up arrow key is pressed, we will decrement it by 2. And finally, we need to update the selected move in the UI. So I'll create a update move selection function just like we created for the action. So just like we did for the action, we looped through all the move text and changed the color of the selected move. So in the case of moves, we need to do one more thing. When a move is selected, we should also show the details of the move in the move details panel. So I'll also take a reference to the move as the parameter. And for the PP text, I'll show both the current PP of the move and the base PP of the move. And in the type text, I'll just show the type of the move. So type is inside the base. Since type is an enum, we need to convert it into string. So now let's call this from the battle system. For the first parameter, I will pass the current move, and for the second, I need to pass the reference to the move. So I can get that from Pokemon.moves of current move. So let's test the game. So you can see that we can select different moves, and the PP and the type of the move changes in the move details panel. So I'll stop the video here, and in the next video, we'll make the Pokemons perform the move when we select it. So if you think these videos are helpful, please consider subscribing to this channel and leave a like on this video. That'll really help me a lot. So I'll see you in the next video.